Welcome back. We all know living in California, the Golden State, is expensive, but a new report shows just how bad it is, especially for communities of color. Joining us now is Ann Price, the president of Insight Center for Community Economic Development, which is behind a new report. Good afternoon, Ann. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All right. It really, grabbed people's attention, the headlines. What were the biggest takeaways from your findings, the report?
Well, our report just quantifies what we already know in the Bay Area, that it's very expensive to live here. But one thing we didn't know is just how expensive it is to even start a family in the Bay Area particularly. And so even having a high minimum wage doesn't help families make ends meet.
This is true. So let's just show people a little bit of what you're talking about. We produce a couple of graphics, and one here shows the percentage of households in California with 2 children struggling to make ends meet. All right. So by race, 29%, or I should say 27% of white households. But look at this. 59% of black households are struggling to make ends meet, and 66% of Latinx households. So what does that tell you, both from a practical standpoint and a policy standpoint?
It really speaks to the structures of our economy. The fact that a lot of communities of color cannot actually, work enough to meet their basic expenses like housing and childcare. And the real issue here really is the rising cost of childcare and how it's even outpacing housing.
All right, so President Biden today, in fact, did try to address that, really announcing support for child care and an expansion of that in California. Governor Newsom will be talking about that as well. What would you like to see happen?
I think we need a myriad of solutions. I really appreciate that the governor has announced a small stimulus. We need to get money in the hands of families so that they can take care of their daily needs. But we need a larger scale set of policies that's going to deal with what we're seeing in the labor market and the housing market. And that's going to be a longer arc.
All right. Just to give people a better sense for child care costs, child care has tripled the cost in the Bay Area, right? That's your finding. The hourly wage needed for a single parent with 2 kids to meet their basic household expenses is around $74 an hour. Is that right? I mean, that sounds like a record high.
That is exactly right. And it sounds so incredible, but it's very true. That's how expensive it is. So, for example, for a family of 4 in San Francisco with 2 school-age kids, they need to make about $153,000 to make ends meet. And that means no assistance from government, our family, or friends. That's what we're talking about here in terms of why we're seeing so many communities of color struggling to take care of their families.
So what is happening in terms of people having children? Are you seeing those numbers starting to turn and go downward as a result of this cost?
I think it's becoming, very difficult for people who want to start a family. And our findings show that basically single Black and Latinx families with no children are struggling more than white families who have 2 kids. That's really incredible. We've never really experienced the issue of, can you start a family in California and really be able to take care of them in the way that you want to?
Okay. Assuming you can overcome barriers and achieve a higher education, right? Let's say a Black woman who has a bachelor's degree, what does their income look like in terms of, being comparable to, for example, white men? Is that gap narrowing or is it widening?
It's actually widening. It really counters our notion that education should not be a barrier to economic security and prosperity. But what we're seeing is a big difference between Black women, for example, and white men who have a bachelor's degree. They're struggling at much higher rates. And that really shouldn't be. It's telling us something about what's happening in the labor market for Black women.
All right. I want to go back to something that's really a big issue for a lot of families, child support payments, and the way the state, you've brought up that it's putting more people who are low income in debt due to the way the state handles them and the interest rates. Talk about that.
You know, I'm talking about state-sponsored child support, not every kind of child support. But actually it puts families into debt. And families that really, they want to take care of their children. And this debt mounts because of the high interest rates that they have to pay once they go into debt. And not all of that money that they give goes to their children. And that's something that people really don't realize.
All right, so in your opinion, when you look at the big picture here, what do you think needs to change? What needs to happen to close the gap?
Yeah, so in that instance, we need to make sure that every dollar that a parent sends should go to his or her child, right? They need to get all of that money. And we need to do something about this penalty and interest rate. It is really hurting families. It's keeping them in a state of economic precarity. We also need a range of other types of policies that can help bolster and address our high poverty rates, particularly for children. And I know that we are a state that has done a lot to move in that direction, but this report shows us that we just have a longer way to go.
All right. I do want to ask you, you know, this is an interactive show, and as viewers watch, some of them are on Facebook Live and putting in questions and comments. Larry does point out here, race has nothing to do with income, and he's not alone. There are others who feel that. What do you say to that?
Well, you know, the reality is that race has everything to do with income, and that's for a variety of reasons. And it's not just because we think that people of color may have lower educational levels. It's really what we see in the labor market. We may not realize that 9 out of 10 jobs are racially segregated in this country, right? So that people are actually forced and pushed into jobs that have lower benefits, that have, you know, lower wages. And that's through no fault of their own. It's the structure of our economy.
Well, I mean, sometimes there are people working the same job and getting different compensation packages and different benefits. I think the New York Times just, you know, featured a mother and daughter who were in the same role and had different packages. Yep. All right. Well, a lot to discuss. We thank you, Ann, for your time today, and good luck to you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. All right, folks, we'll take a short break on the air.